What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Unlocking Greatness. You are watching, you are looking at Scott Choppin. Scott is a real estate developer, but what I think is really cool, and I hope we're going to dig into a little bit, is he says he is a mission-focused real estate developer. And so we're going to hear about that. We're going to talk about just being husbands and fathers and trying to do the best we can to live as Christ calls us in a world that is always in absolute chaos. But for now, Scott, what's up, man? Welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here, Ryan. Good to see you.
You too. You too. So these are always fun conversations because, I mean, we did have a brief discussion a couple weeks back, just kind of scratching the surface of who we are. But a lot of times these are great ways just to get to know each other and to let everybody else be a fly on the wall. And as a matter of fact, I was talking to another guy that I met on X as well. And yesterday we were recording an episode, and that was one of the things I said was I think that for most men, particularly those that are entrepreneurially minded, that's a squeezer there. We end up in these silos. Sometimes we do that intentionally. Other times we just kind of naturally, I guess, do that. But we don't often get to hear how other people are doing it, apart maybe from going to a conference or watching a video of an influencer that we follow. And that stuff is so packaged neatly and tightly, which is helpful, but it's just not relatable. And so I love the fact that we just get to do this in a very organic way. So I want to just dig right into that phrase. So you say mission-driven real estate developer, right? There's more there, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that means to you and how that came to be, because I would assume that from birth you were not mission driven. Maybe God had you mission driven, but we figure that out later. So just love to hear a little bit about that.
No, that's great. So I won't go into deep history, but come from a family in the real estate development business, grew up around it. For a period of time when I was like 18, 19, that's what I didn't want to do. Spent a couple of years working in the electrical trades, doing construction work on apartment buildings, interestingly enough, and knew I didn't want to do that. And that's sort of where I got the idea. Okay, there's this business, real estate development, and I started to study, read books, and then sort of got the bug to go do that, and then developed professional career working for other folks. And then 24 years ago this year, I started my company in Pacific, and we weren't mission focused or mission driven, but I did what I will offer is that for a period of time, for about 4 years, I worked for a company. It's a company people might know, KB Home. It used to be called Kaufman and Broad, and there I did affordable housing development. Think like government subsidized, family and senior housing. And although that was a corporate offer and, profit focused, a publicly traded company, that affordable housing has that like mission component. Often a lot of nonprofits travel in that space. It's serving, lower income folks, families and seniors, that kind of thing. And so when I started the company, we didn't necessarily want to do that. But about 8 years ago, Ryan, we basically sort of, looked around to see what was out in the marketplace to differentiate ourselves. I've always been a believer in, but I would say contrarian. Often people would say, hey, I'm a contrarian, like I'm going against the grain, and there's definitely that. But I think I would maybe think of in the context of niche operations, like we're looking for categories of housing types that were differentiated. So we were doing urban housing before that existed in a really mainstream way. So we've always been sort of oriented around this niche. But about 8 years ago, we basically created this townhouse style rental unit that has 5 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. I won't go into great detail here, but basically that unit type was created to house families. Like that's when we call the mission focus, is that we're building this type of rental housing specifically to serve middle income, multi-generational families in California. We're operational in Southern California, and we'll be up in the Bay Area here soon. And, as everybody who's based here, you and I are based here, affordable housing and housing constraints and housing costs are like top of mind for everybody. And because I come from, like, I'm a family person, I'm a family man, I'm a husband, I'm a father. To me, I got what it meant to help families. Now, of course, we rent to roommates. We're still need to make money and be profitable. But, everywhere we can, we're always focused on these families, and that's what we speak predominantly. So for the last 8 years, we've been completely focused on this product type to serve families. It's all we do. In fact, I can offer that's all I will ever do for the rest of my career. So I could talk more about that, but that.
Yeah, no. So actually, I do have an interesting question that I had no idea that this part of the discussion was going to come up, but I heard this fascinating kind of statement that was made the other day. So, to my understanding, affordable housing is deemed as housing can't cost more than 30% of gross annual income, but that's median income of the community, correct? I'm like kind of.
Yeah, here's how I answer that. That's basically a very well used rule of thumb. Okay, basically people say, so you would say whatever the family's income or the person's income to make it affordable. In other words, to enable them to have money left over to afford other things, they shouldn't spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs. Now, part of the differentiation is it one person, is it a couple, is it a family? And for our housing type, one of the interesting things is that often the families we serve are already basically working together in an economic sense of mom and dad and maybe adult kids and grandparents and in-laws, and they're sharing housing costs together, they're sharing incomes, and this is just a natural part of who they are. And we just give a housing type that serves them. So, but to answer your question, the 30% is a rule of thumb. The affordable housing programs often use that as a technical limit when they sort of adjust the rents for like what I call true affordable housing, meaning government subsidized housing. But
and then even like when they offer, when new development plans come into the city, into the county, whatever, into the state, right? That's kind of part of how they create that. So they're offering affordable housing in the area. But one of the things that I heard, what was so interesting was, so, I think I would say you'd probably agree with this. Like we live in this tension of, as believers, we want to create as many opportunities for people as possible. At the same time, I think you'd probably also agree, like I'm a capitalist and I believe in everybody's ability to be able to create the most successful path for their own life possible, so long as they don't stomp out other people in the process. And yet in an affluent community like I live in, a reasonably affluent community, I'm probably at the bottom of that. But I think the average income in my city, household income, is about $150,000 to $175,000. It's like somewhere in that range.
Right.
And so if we were to say, okay, so that's a $13,000 a month, income, 30% of that is $4,000 a month, right? I'm just like throwing really round numbers here.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine for the people that are earning, as a dual income household or, one high income earner. That makes a lot of sense. And it's like, great. Thankfully, I don't have to spend $8,000 a month on rent, which is some of the housing in my area. I can find stuff for $4,000 a month, whatever. But it's classing out people like my daughter, who is 22. And again, I don't think that we need to create an expectation that because you want to buy a house at 20 something that you should be able to afford something in your area. That's not reality. But do you see, and again, we're getting really technical here, but I'm just kind of curious to have you, like, do you see opportunities to solve for some of those problems? Because there is, again, there's such a gap in affordability right now. Obviously, our economy is just in this chaotic spot. So whether through your organization, your business, or just in general, like, do you see things like that, there being opportunities that are going to be created to meet that gap?
I mean, that's like you hit the heart of what we do every day. That's why we created this exact product type. So the sort of the high level way I think of it, we've got the government subsidized housing, we've got the regular market rate housing, we got our offer. Like we need thousands of people, thousands of companies doing innovative, offerings in the housing marketplace to serve many different types of housing. The reality though, to use your example, look, for better or worse, there's really two things that are like having housing costs become expensive. One is general inflation, which we're all experiencing in a fairly radical way. And then in California, we just have supply constraint, right? And the combination of those. So part of it is to work against those, but also to offer housing types that allow people to to live a lifestyle that enables a better housing opportunity. So like these families come together, and the unique thing about the families is they often have multi-earners. In fact, we call it multi-earner, multi-generational housing. And so, for you and me or your daughter, let's say, or however, like we would get roommates, right? We would share with our families, grandparent would move in. There's something called co-living, which would be unrelated adults who are coming together, renting a room in with other rooms. But the idea is to share the economics of the cost of the housing. Now, people will say, look, that's not preferable. I would like my person to have the ability to rent their own unit. And I would say in a perfect world, that would be true, but we live in reality, right? Economic reality. So I think you hit it right on the head. It's gonna require people to innovate, to come up with solutions that sort of take what's existing today, the fabric of what was available, what we can do, what we can accomplish, the economic cycle, politics, and then create new housing opportunities inside there. I will offer this as a final thought. Look, the reality is the real estate industry, real estate developers are not a particularly creative bunch. I mean, we are entrepreneurial, like we create deals, but the idea of creating a new product, a new type of apartment is like really just rare. In fact, this is part of when we go and raise capital on these 5-bedroom deals. That's our hardest thing is people go, man, 5 bedrooms, that's crazy, dude. What? Like who? No one rents that. And we go, people rent it. They do. You just don't think about it. You don't think about who is the Starbucks barista or the admin at your office or the guy who, is at work at the gas station. Where do they move home to live or where do they go home to live? Right. And so when you start to think about that, they live with their families, they have their own families, whatever. So we just need to basically sort of open up the dialogue about that and then create a bunch of new housing types and a lot of new innovations in that space.
That's so cool. And so how Scott, like what was the kind of mind shift change for you to really lead you into like this is where I'm convicted to go?
Yeah. I think it was that background I talked about at that other company where I worked in the affordable housing world, and that got me exposure to who these people were. Like if you look at the humanity of these people, seniors that need affordable housing, families that need affordable housing. And so that, like, I didn't choose that. Like that sort of developed, like I got my first job. I was looking to work for a specific group of people at a specific company, and I got there. They just happened to do affordable housing, right? Like I didn't choose that necessarily. I wanted to work with the people in the company, but that got me that exposure to it. And really, honestly, I carried that forward with me, in my experience and the tools that I have available and the ways that I think about and the philosophies I had. But to be quite honest with you, and then we sort of crossed this a little bit, but really, if I think about it, I was saved when I was 14. We talked about Elizabeth at Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa, Chuck Smith, who's well known. And, this was sort of the mid 80s, early 80s. There's a lot of Christian rock bands, and I was in a band, and that sort of like got me exposed to that. And go forward, I basically I was lost. I was still a believer. I still believed in the person of Jesus and the salvation that he granted us with the sacrifice that he made, but I was like off track, right? And I happened to be doing business with a person between about 2013 and let's say like 2018, who is a really well-known developer, a guy named Caleb Roop, is like probably top 5 affordable housing developers in the nation. He happens to be Christian as well. Now we didn't like connect at that level, but I happened to be like, learning network with him. And I sat with him in it was 2019 in October. I remember this. And what part of my struggle with being I would say a good Christian, right? Like a true professing, practicing Christian was that I couldn't ever quite sort of put together the idea of creating wealth and having wealth and being a true believer, right? To have a true belief in Christ. Like that to me, like those didn't match up. And I won't go into the details of it, but Caleb in this, would get together 4 times a year. One of these things, he just spoke very casually about a belief that he had from the Bible, and it related to money. And it finally, like, the light bulb went off for me that I was like, oh, this guy's doing it. Like, he's an example of what can be done. And what he happened to do is his philosophy was to do all affordable housing, right? All kinds of government subsidized housing. And he had made a really great business out of it, right? I mean, like, very, very successful, good, but combined with a great philosophy and a belief in Christ and a being a great offer of help. So I will just say it sort of coalesced in God's plan is how I look back on it. Like, there were certain things that happened that I didn't know they were happening, but they sort of came together in this point in that time period. And we had already been doing this product type for a couple of years. Like, we started in 2016. This is 2019, but it finally came together for me. And I would even argue since 2019 through to today, I just more and more signals just tell me this is what you need to be doing. This is God's plan for you. That yes, you have all these skills. You're a really good real estate developer, great strategist in real estate, problem solver in real estate. And he gave me the idea of the 5-bedroom product, right? Like, I mean, it sort of left out of my background and certain things we were working on. But I look back on it and I was like, I can't say anybody but God gave me the idea of it. And as it sort of came together, as things do in his plan, when you finally figure out what it is, like, you go, gosh, I didn't see it. And now I see it more clearly. And I would even say that, like, more things are happening even now, raising capital and doing different things we're in activities now. Those pieces just keep coming together. And I can't, I can't say it's anything to do with me. I mean, I'm the executor of the plan, right? I take the steps, but the plan and his guidance is there.
Yeah. It's so crazy that you say, I mean, it's not crazy at all, but so wild that you say what you said, because so I was fairly successful by the time I was 23, 24 back then. So that was 23 years ago. And, I cracked 6 figures. That was a lot of money back then. And I owned my own home and, just whatever. And I quickly began to just abuse money. And I became a Christian in 2006. The housing crisis, the crash happens in 2008. I actually was working in the building industry as well. So the business that I was working in just got crushed. Financially, I got crushed. I ended up losing my house. And so, like, through all of this, I came to believe, first of all, for me personally, that God would never, ever, ever give me money again because I had abused it so poorly in the past. But that also created in me this callous nature towards people, Christians, that had money, because I just felt like, gosh, like, you're greedy, or, why do you have to have so much? And I will never forget, there was 2 specific moments. One was a pastoral exhortation on me specifically when I was really struggling during that time. But the moment that I finally woke up was I went to this charity event. A friend of mine was a full-time missionary, and so he was raising support all the time. And so he asks me to come down. I just become a pastor. He asks me to come down to San Juan Capistrano, which is here in Southern California, down by the beach. Come down to San Juan Capistrano, he says, and I want you to do the ask for me for this event. My wife and I pull up to this event, or pull up to this house. It's 3 stories on the coast in San Clemente. Sorry, not San Juan Capistrano. San Clemente. On the coast. Literally, it's the house, the Amtrak train tracks, sand, and the water. 3 stories. This guy's got everything you could possibly imagine. I mean, it is just like so overboard. And I immediately start the feeling. I'm like, gosh, like, this guy just rich. There's no way he's a Christian, blah, 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 whatever. He takes a couple of us on a tour through the house, and the guy starts talking, and I just heard the Lord speak through him. Just his grace, his generosity, his kindness, his admittance that none of it was his and everything was God's to be given. He ends up writing my friend this incredible check, which that was just like the end, that had nothing to do with like what changed my mind.
On the cake, ostensibly.
Yeah, but God really just woke me up to this idea that absolutely having a significant amount of wealth is difficult to do as a Christian, which is why the Bible says the love of money is the root of evils, because we have this inherent desire to love money. But there is so many incredible things that can be done by Christians with wealth. And, in Luke 12, when it says, for much is given, much is required, we are all given access to incredible wealth. It may not always be financial. Sometimes it's knowledge-based. Sometimes it's relational. We are given so much by God, and we are required of so much. The problem is most of us squander that we have been given. And so God begins to just peel it away, or we abuse it. And so I love that you say that, because I think more Christians need to hear that we should be striving for the stewardship of what God has given us. And in doing that, God will continue to give to us. And when we start to recognize that things aren't going our way, or we don't have what we think we should, it's probably because we're outside the will of God, and therefore he's not going to continue to give it to us.
Yeah. In fact, I love what you're saying, because that's a conversation I've been having, with God and with myself about that exact thing. Like, it's like, pray for provision, and how do I do that? And how do I treat that when it arrives? And, for me in the real estate business, like I went through 2006 as well, and I had a bunch of deals, and, it was crazy times. And that really, being an entrepreneur in real estate development and going through that, like sort of equally like craziness, right? that very, very high risk, a lot of capital required. And coming through 2008, it just like it I don't know what's the word? It makes you, I don't want to say paranoid, that's not the right word, but it makes you nervous about money. Like when money stops and you don't have the opportunity to create, more revenue to take care of your family and pay the mortgage and, like move the business forward. It puts you like on edge about money, right? Worry about it's not coming. Like money's not there. I don't know when it's coming, right? Like that's just, and look, the reality is, particularly in marriages and family life, that is a core reason for man and wife, men and their wives to not, stay together, right? Unfortunately, that's like one of the primary drivers of divorce, unfortunately, in our culture. I'm very lucky. My wife has been incredible and still is credible. And, we continue to travel that path together. But I know what you mean. And so what I'm getting at is that I'm really working that process of learning to pray for provision, but to do it in a way that like it seeks God's plan for that money, that capital. Help me do more projects because I know that will serve your families. Help me raise capital to produce more units because I know that will be helpful for whoever needs the housing, right? And so that's where that mission focus sort of like became like a primary part of what we do. And look, again, we rent to anybody who can rent, right? Like we don't restrict it only to families, but we always seek families first, whereas building locations that we think it can serve the sort of families that we're looking for, which are middle income, working class families, which are like total. That's by the way a type of group, a type of demographic that is totally unserved.
Yeah.
On one side you got affordable housing, government subsidized for the lowest income people. You got, luxury housing for people who make a lot of money. But for a working class, salt of the earth family, there's nothing.
Yeah. And
so to me has been where like I've seen God's plan really develop most effectively, is like I go, okay, these are people that need help, that in God's plan, they have their purpose in having great housing to serve their family in the way that the family is oriented, right? It keeps the family together, keeps the family healthy. They're in new housing, right? It helps them from a safety standpoint. It's in the communities where they already live, right? Like one of the key characteristics of what we develop is we want to build in like blue collar neighborhoods throughout Southern California where these families already live. Like we're not trying to get them to move, 8 cities over. And hey, there's this housing. A lot of families wouldn't do that, but like the reality is for us, keeping strong social networks together is really important. That's one of the primary components of like how we serve housing and where we serve it and the typology of the housing, because we want those extended families to stay together. We want the kids to remain in school where they already are, right? Strong social networks make for strong, family groups, and the housing that facilitates that is like what we're all about. So
I love that. I forgot you're in California too, right?
correct. Yeah.
Yeah. This is one of the things that, again, I've been just spending a lot of time around, and it brings about a lot of frustration because, there's obviously a lot of people exiting California because of, I'll generally just say politics, right?
Mhm.
Just kind of like the social construct that's been created in California.
Yeah.
But I firmly believe that the majority of that middle class that has exited California would have tolerated and actually fought back against the politics of California if they could have afforded to stay here. And the politics obviously have a significant impact on the finances. But I think, you bring up such a great issue that we need to continue to strive for, which is we have created this massive middle class gap, and we're driving people out of the areas, which, by the way, like, those are the people that are going to get down and dirty and fight for good policies.
Yeah.
We think that it's, the elite with a lot of money and a lot of power. Yes, they have a lot of influence, but those that are going to fight, like I'm running for school board right now, like those that are going to fight for school board, those that are going to fight in city councils, those are going to have direct impact and influence on the direction of the city, the county, the communities are going to be the middle class, because they're the ones that are in the workplace, they're in the schools, they're in the communities day in and day out. But when we're driving them out, like what's happened here in Orange County, California, the more that we drive out those that would fight, the more that we're seeing our own county turn over to the narrative that, generally speaking, the rest of California is facing. And so I really hope, obviously, like there's this sad pessimistic side of me that says that it's going to have to get far worse before it gets better. But I just feel like we've got to figure out a way to draw some of these people back in. And it's going to have to be by way of, again, affordable housing and relatively affordable. I don't think it's fair that the government mandates that, you've created this great community, and it's not to class people out, but you've created this great community, this great environment. It's like, now I want you to go in and put this, bottom of the barrel stuff in just to make sure that certain people can live in it. I don't believe in that at all, though. I do believe we need to create space for people. But
and that misses a whole component of the marketplace. I mean, that housing type you describe, and those people are very deserving, let's say at or below 60% of median income for people that want to attract that kind of stuff. But your whole middle class, to your point, is not served like whatsoever by the government agencies, by the development community. And one of the things I actually put out on X this morning is, I'm a firm believer that people who have children think much more deeply about the future of whatever is around them, where they are, where they live, the community around them. And, look, people will get up in arms about it. Like, well, I don't have kids and I'm a good person. I'm not saying that, but I know as I have 3 kids, like everything I do is to help their future, even to the extent that it may be contrary to my better interests. And, any parent would agree with that. And so this housing, serving families, to me, that's like the people you describe, salt of the earth, right? Blue collar, working class. I mean, you're right. Those are exactly the people that will fight. And look, the reality is, I also think, and this is sort of where I'm always in the conversation right now with, on X and people that I talk to, like, what's the long-term future of California, right? Not to make this a California-centric conversation entirely, but, our political system is like just whack, right? With no disagreement there. And I go, what's the end game for that? Like, where does that end? How wacky can it get? Like, how crazy and insane can it really get? And that keeps surprising me, unfortunately. Where I'm at, Ryan, is I think it's our middle class who will just go, stop this craziness. I'm unwilling to put up with it anymore. And obviously we serve housing for those kind of people, but I'm watching people, and in fact, I was on a call this morning with investors, and they were like, oh, California, my investors think California is crazy and rent control and, crazy politics. And I go, that's true. But look at the political area of the coastal zone is like deep blue, but the rest of California is very red. Right? I mean, not to get into politics in this particular conversation, but those inland areas are where those middle income families that have a willingness to fight. And that's happens to be where we're really focused on those sort of inland areas for families. But I'm totally with you. And I think that you're right. A lot of people move because they can make the same income at a job in Texas, but the housing's, half the cost or whatever.
Yep.
And we need to resolve that. And that'll be part of the fight, right? The fight against regulations. And, if anybody follows Elon Musk on X, I mean, he's like very much like, anti-California. He moved out, he lived here, and he said, hey, I would have stayed. Had the regulatory environment not been so crazy, I would have stayed in California. So I think that'll be part of the fight to break that. And I think that's coming. I don't know when, but I think at some point people are just going to go, look, enough.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and what I hope happens, and this is, back to God's grace and sovereignty, sometimes in the midst of having to hurt us in the process, is we see all throughout Scripture that God didn't punish his people for fun. He often made it hurt in order for them to realize what they were missing, or, the fact that they were turning from him and turning to other things. And in a very real way, again, here I live in Orange County, California. We have been in this conservative bubble that has been relatively untouched until about 5 years ago, as much of the country. And what's mind-blowing to me is there are still so many people that are sitting on their hands, not understanding the implications of every single proposition on a ballot, every single candidate that's on a ballot. I mean, right now, again, like we have on the ballot for 2024 a minimum wage increase statewide. And at face value, if you have no idea what you're talking about and no idea what you're doing, you're like, absolutely, people need to get paid more money. Because people haven't taken the time to understand the basic economics that are involved with raising minimum wage just another dollar, which it's not even going to be a dollar. It's going to be more than that. And so I'm thinking to myself, like, if these people don't get off their hands and start educating themselves on everything from that type of thing to, again, housing and what that looks like. I can make your head spin. We have right now 2 measures on the ballot here in my city of Yorba Linda. And one is going to pass our city's development plan to keep the state of California out of controlling our development plan, which is what we want. But people are just looking at it and saying, no, I don't want more housing, so I'm not going to vote to pass that.
Yeah.
And we're like, no. That keeps local development control, which is what we want. We don't want the state imposing that. That's one. But people are so confused because they're not taking the time and they're just looking at headlines.
Yeah.
We have a second measure on the ballot that is going to build 300 units in an area that already has the worst conditions for traffic, in the highest fire danger in our entire city. The developer has spent over $250,000 to try and twist that messaging around and make it sound like they're going to benefit the community by putting 900 people in those 300 units in an area that should never have it. And so again, the community, I'm watching this on our local social, social media pages. People are so confused and they're just looking at flyers that come in the mail or signs up. And I'm like, yo, if you don't pay attention, you aren't going to have a city to live in anymore, And so I'm just hoping again that these quiet, conservative, mostly people get off of their hands. They start to get involved in what's going on so we can turn this thing around, because if not, the social elite are just going to continue to dictate what's happening. Frankly, it's sad. They don't care about the middle. They don't care about any class but themselves. And they will do whatever is going to be best for them. And eventually they're going to die and they don't care what they leave.
Well, and by the way, lots of those people you just described don't have kids.
Right.
It's interesting to me, like somebody I saw this again on X, but all these different high profile people that we know are like sort of this sort of political philosophy, none of them have kids.
Yep.
I go, of course, that makes sense. They don't care about the future. It's like them, for me, and then I'm done. No, I'm right with you, and I think that the days of the low information voter, that this is sort of back to my conversation. Like, when does it break? Like, when does it get so bad that the common man just says, dude, stop this. This is crazy. And I'm starting to see it bubble up a little bit. Like follow a couple people. There's a really nice lady up in like Tracy up in the Central Valley who, you know, is running as a Republican, and not to make this political, but, you know, she's like, dude, my family, like my husband and my kids, like I gotta look out for them. And so I'm running for that. So I think we'll start to see more and more of that, you know, and what you described in the, you know, the political housing environment, these referendums. I mean, that's like crazy territory. Welcome to California. You know, we're the home of referendums, right? Like we're, you know, to our detriment, I would argue.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely bananas. Well, who knew we were going to spend the better part of 35 minutes talking about real estate in the way that we did? But I think this is so good, Scott, because again, you know, what I started off with in the beginning, which was, we don't know where this is going to go. We're just getting to know each other. We're just going to sit down like we're having a cup of coffee, and we're just going to talk life and shoot the shit. And whatever comes of it, comes of it. And I believe that there are people out there that something was said. Either it was, man, I need a new perspective on money, or gosh, I need to get involved in my politics, or gosh, I need to get behind the proper type of affordable housing, or whatever. Like, I think that there is so much blessing to specifically men, because that's just so much of my audience, but just to people just being invested into these conversations on how we grow to get better so we can grow the world to get better. And so I love being able to do things like this.
Yeah, I love it too, man. Glad we could talk about it. Yeah, we talked more about real estate than we intended.
But it's so good. It's so good. Well, and it's funny, remember, because
for all the right reasons, right?
And I think that, you know, when we originally connected on X over doing a podcast, I was clear. I was like, I don't want to talk about really like the business process and practice and 7 steps to success. We didn't really go there, but then just naturally this stuff happens. And again, this is so much more than like how you have built your you know, real estate development company to serve affordable, and like it's the natural way of life, and it's how you are working out the calling God has on your life, which makes you a better husband and a better father and a better follower of Jesus. It makes you a better professional in the world. And that's what I'm after. Like when I talk a lot about men and greatness, and they're like, well, how do you define greatness? And I always say, I believe that greatness is ultimately fulfilling the calling that God has on your life. We have to know what that is, and we have to have a vision to get there. But I believe that that's what we're after. So I appreciate you coming on and pouring that out. And I just think that it's super valuable for other people to hear. And I can't wait to share it.
Yeah, great. Well, I appreciate being here, Ryan. So it's a great conversation.
No, for sure. All right, guys. Well, another episode in the books. I'll make sure to put Scott's contact information into the show notes. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you know where to find me. Like it, subscribe. I don't know, do whatever you want to do. But until next time, get out there and live the greatness that God has called you to. Talk to you guys soon.